everyone. My name is Duncan. Welcome to Commander's Pod. This is our 20th episode. I am joined here by Sloan.
What up?
And Jeff.
What's up?
And we thank you for joining us today. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff today. We're going to talk about have commander players lost their way? Have we missed the point of the game? We're going to talk about things that don't do what you think it does. We're going to talk about how to build your land base for a deck, or maybe argue about it. We'll find out.
Probably argue.
And we're going to talk about, as always, what's aggravating Jeff. We'll be his psychotherapist. We'll help him work through his issues, help him resolve that anger so he doesn't Hulk out. So, first of all, tales from the table. I don't have anything specific, but I do have something that was just kind of really cool. Again, talking about the pre-release because that was recent for me. But I, in the final round, played against this player, and I remembered I had played against him in the previous pre-releases. But being me, I'm like, he doesn't remember playing against me, I'm sure. And we're playing the game, and as I mentioned in the previous one, I always lose the final one, but it's very close. It's always neck and neck. And so he wins, but barely. I think he had 2 life left. And he says, our games are always really down to the wire. And I was like, you're right, they are. And it was just cool that we remembered each other, and it was like, they are. We're always, when I face him, it's always back and forth, and it's always very, very close. And it's just kind of cool. Like, I was like, oh, he doesn't remember me. There's like 50 people here, but he did. And it just kind of.
You always remember those you defeat.
Yeah. But
yeah, if you're who's it, Killmonger, you just make scars on yourself for you defeat and kill.
Yeah. But no, it just kind of goes with our topic from last time about getting with players and playing with new people. Like it's just you make connections even when you play only once. So I just thought that was kind of
for
cool.
sure.
Yeah, and with you too, it's cool because like you said, you go to that LGS a lot, specifically Mythic Forge, and you do a lot of pre-releases. So it is cool that you guys almost have like this pre-release battle now that you're kind of building and developing, and maybe one day you'll beat them.
But, I mean,
I've beaten him before because I don't always.
As they say in sports, it's not a rivalry till the other guy wins.
Right.
I have beat him, just not in the final round.
Yeah.
I've beat him when I played him first or second.
Yeah, not when it counts.
Thanks. But now we're going to talk about what should your land base look like. And I chose this for our counterspell because I think all 3 of us are going to have 3 very different answers.
It should look like Magic cards.
Oh, I guess we all have the same answer.
The
Okay, moving on.
Moving on. Yeah, that's it. Jeff
Done.
nailed
That was
it.
simple.
Done.
This recording will go real quick.
But so I'll do mine because I am the outlier.
Yeah, I think you're the most dramatic on one side, and I think Jeff's the most dramatic on the other side, I would say.
But so for me, when I build my deck, let's pretend it's 2 or 3 colors, right? So what I do first is I go through and look for utility lands that fit into whatever I'm trying to do in the deck.
100% agree with you.
I look for things. Flash is good in almost any deck as long as the utility land has the colors that will do it. Like there's a Simic one, a blue-green. There's some other ones. So if I'm not playing blue-green, I can't do it. But I'll look for things that are either good in the deck or do the thing I want to do. The next thing I do is count that and then put the rest basics. That's how I do it. Almost always.
Right.
Now, if I'm playing 3 or more colors, I may do a couple fetches or things to make sure I can get my color matches. So the 2 color lands, I will tend to only put Command Tower in 2 color or more decks. And if I need color fixing, I'll also throw in like Exotic Orchard, Reflecting Pool. And that's pretty much it. But usually for me, I might have on a 3 color deck, maybe 5 or 6 of those ways to make sure I get my colors, and a few utility lands, and the rest are.
So what's
basic.
your land base count? Your actual lands?
It depends on the deck and how much ramp I have.
Right. So on average, let's do an average though.
On average,
give a range.
I would say 34.
Okay. So on average, 34.
Really? It's that low?
So 34 lands is your average.
Wow.
But
So
remember,
let's say,
every deck I am playing Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, and at least 3 other mana rocks.
Okay.
Right. So let's say 34. We'll say is your average. Let's round it up to 35 just to make life a little bit easier. So let's say 35 is your average. 5 of them are utility.
Right.
2 or 3 are multicolor producers, quote unquote. Maybe like you're
In a 3-color or more. I never do it in the 2-color.
well, like
I might
command
put
tower,
command tower
like for,
or- yeah, okay,
command
yeah.
tower. So like command tower, exotic orchard, and
Reflecting
your
pool.
reflecting pool. So there's your 3 multicolor, quote unquote.
Yep.
So that puts us at what, 8? So you're rocking 27 basic lands.
Yep.
Jeff, your response.
I agree with looking at lands that fit what you're doing with your commander. And if you have commanders that are particularly scary or important to what you're doing, there are lands that will help you get your commander back. So you don't have to pay the commander costs and things of that
Like
nature.
command beacon.
Yeah, exactly. So things like that. If you have to attack, obviously you want things that give you evasion. If you're playing more of a control, Maze of Ith, things like that. So things that fit.
Well, to be clear, I do not count Maze of Ith as a land because it won't tap for mana.
Okay,
Even though it
but
is a land,
if I
I
play
do not-
Maze of Ith, I typically play other things that let me tap it.
And real quick before we go too much deeper, out of your basic lands, because this is also important to know, how do you distinguish how many you put in each? So
Depends on the percentage of colors in my deck.
So you have 27 basic lands to put in. Generally speaking,
If the deck is balanced with both colors, it will be
50-50.
well, you can't with 27.
Well, I
but
understand,
always
but-
blue always gets the extra one.
so blue basic lands are going to be higher for Duncan when it comes down to it. That was the only last thing I wanted to point out, because he has said in the past, he's like, when I first built it, what colors are there? How many lands do I have? Great. Divide it by 3, that's it.
Yeah, usually. But sometimes though, you do have, if you notice, I don't
heavier
count
color.
necessarily how many blue versus, let's say it's blue black. I
what-
don't count necessarily. But if I can tell just by looking that it's 2/3 blue and only 1/3 black.
What you should be really paying attention to is how many pips there are on your cards.
Yeah.
That's what will kill
Well,
you.
I-
And then
did
and this
that
is
too.
and this is where I
with-
think the difference comes in. So
But-
keep going
but
with you, Jeff.
For me,
Oh.
that's not as big a deal. And a 2-color deck especially, I don't care. It's usually 50-50. I have plenty of each.
Well, and maybe that's true, but you got to look at the pips. You got to look at what cards are going to get you there to your game plan. So, like if I'm playing green, well, a lot of my ramp is probably going to be green based. So I'm going to favor green as the land source because it's going to get me to my other colors. So whatever you're going to have doing that. If you're using mana rocks, you have less of that problem. Then you're just paying attention to the pips. If I'm playing 3, 4, 5, probably 4 and 5 colors, I'm maybe running, especially in the 5 color, 2 to 3 basic lands of each type that's in there. And maybe 2.
Yeah, because that's 10 right there.
Yeah. So, and I like to play the sack lands, the triomes in those decks. I like the MDFCs can be really good. Cards where your lands
That's the flip cards.
modal double face cards. Yeah. So it's a spell or something on one side and a land on the other. Typically that will come and play untapped.
Now, do you also like to go with the double face land cards that come in untapped? Like you get to pick which color it's going to be depending on what you
pathway.
need.
So typically I'll play those as filler because there's the perfect mana base I'd like for every deck, and there's what I can afford to run with 24 different decks. So I do have some of those just because I can't afford to have the perfect mana base in every single one of my decks.
Sure.
And then there are also lands that do things on the other side, like they can come in as a spell. There's a green one, a blue one that are really good. They'll come in as a spell, or they'll do something. And then mostly I do not like tap lands except for early on in the game, or if they're like a triome and they're going to get me a lot of value. And then recently these surveil lands have been really nice. So those are pretty cool.
So what's your land-based number that you're generally looking around for a deck?
So I think you start at like 42, and then for every like 3 ramp,
Oh
you
my
can
word!
cut.
No way.
For every 3 ramp, you can cut a land.
no.
Typically, I want to be at like 38 lands plus probably 10 ramp.
So, and then with the 38 actual lands, when you go to break it down on the majority of your decks, and we're going to kind of exclude monocolor decks because obviously it doesn't make sense. Like most of these rules won't apply to monocolor decks for the most part. So when you're looking at your lands, 38 is what you said is about your average that you're going for.
So
how
if
many
there's
are
a lot of ramp, I'll go down to 36. I think there are some that I might run with 34, but it has to be like
I don't know
huge
how you
ramp
don't get
decks.
mana flooded more often.
so your average you would
'Cause
say
I
is
draw
probably
a lot of cards.
your average you would probably say is 36 then. Like
No,
30
it's closer to 38. but
Okay, fine.
it's
So we're gonna-
so we say 37.
Okay, so 37. So your 37 lands, how many utilities are you generally looking at? So these
Five,
aren't these
maybe
aren't
6.
Okay, so 6, so we're down to 31. Now, how many are like the multicolor lands? They're not technically utility, they're just they give me
It
multiple
all depends
colors.
on how many. It all depends on
Generalized.
if it's 4 or 5.
So 4 or
colors.
5.
4 or 5 colors. Then you're gonna play more of those. You're gonna play more triomes in a 5-color deck.
Again, we're trying to be generic here just for
3-color.
the sake of it for us to have the
multicolor.
argument.
The vast majority of the rest of my cards would be
So I guess the easier question is where are you landing at with basics?
10 maybe.
10. So
At the most.
your 10 basics, essentially your 21 multicolored lands, and then 6 utility.
Yeah, probably something like
Okay.
that.
So
I mean, it really each deck is different, but those are
sure,
the
but
thought
again, we're just trying to
process.
generalize it for the
Sure.
sake of the segment.
Well, and
for
it's also
argument.
important to know the thought process behind it. What
Right.
you have to think through.
Right. So for me, the land count I start at is generally speaking, I think 37 is what I started doing. Is 37 to 36 is what I start at. And then what I do is I go through and I try to pick utility lands about 5 to 7, and I try to pick 5 to 7 multicolored lands. So I'm at 14 there, and then I split up the basics for the remainder. So now a lot of times, especially more recently, because some of my decks have been a little bit quicker and I've been able to get to mana faster and the curve of my decks is a little bit lower, I've been realizing I can actually drop closer to 34-ish, 35-ish lands. And I'll give you 2 really good examples just because they're newer decks. My Prosper deck and my Calamax deck. Calamax is really good at drawing cards and building up ramp because he's green, blue, red. And he's going to double my ramp spell whenever I cast it, my first one each turn, if it's an instant. But I also have other cards in there that are going to double my cast. So even if it's a sorcery, I have other cards that will double it. So I'm going to get double land out of it, right? And then in my Prosper deck, because whenever I cast something from exile, I'm creating a treasure. I'm counting that as ramp, quote unquote, right? So so I've noticed in those decks, I'm better off going down closer to 34 mana because of the fact that I'm getting so much mana just by playing other cards in comparison.
Like in Rise, the Redeemed,
Yeah.
I only play 34 lands because the elves
Yeah,
can make
elves-
so much mana.
Yeah, and they
in
produce
Atraxa,
right.
I only play 34 lands because the artifacts come out and then she proliferates the artifact, and some
Right.
artifacts tap for like 7, 8, 9, 10 mana.
So I would challenge
So-
both of you. Now, it's a little different the more colors you run. The more colors you run, the more lands I think you need. To me, a 5-color deck needs more lands than a 3 or 2
Two-color deck. Right, and I agree. I would agree with that.
because you need to get there. You need to get to your mana fixation.
Right.
You've
And if
played
you have
me a
5
lot.
colors, that's
You've-
5 pips right there you need.
You
Right.
have played me a lot.
Yeah.
When have I ever struggled to have? When do I miss land drops?
No, you don't. But I've also
Okay,
I
and when
have
do
seen
I
you
ever
get flooded,
get
but
stuck?
I'm surprised.
When
it's
do
not
I
mine.
ever get stuck with unplayable card? I'm not,
But here's
because
the
I
di-
have enough card draw
but-
on my deck. It's not a problem as
but
long
what
as
I-
I have lands to cast it.
But what I will say is in some of your decks, you're spending so much resources on getting the lands that you're sometimes behind just by default. What happens?
I would agree.
I don't think
It's
so.
happened before. You've had games where you're like, I have so many cards in my hand, but none of them are anything that are useful. Like I'm just getting more ramp. Like I'm just getting more and more lands out.
I can remember many
And
games
there's
like
there's
that.
games where you've done that where you've had so many ramp spells because of again you're focusing so hard on getting on the land out that that by default makes you fall behind. Now again, that's more of
Almost
ramp. So
all
we're
my ramp spells are 2 costs. They're so easy to get out. I don't.
but
If-
my point is
if
because you have
anything,
so
would see
many
me
of
with-
them.
If anything, you would see me with no cards in my hand, which just doesn't ever happen.
I would challenge both of you on 3 colors and less to run 34 lands.
No
base.
way.
Just try it.
Nope.
Take out 2 lands from some of your decks and see you'd be surprised that you are not going to notice a difference.
I actually think my Prosper is at 34, and I think Calamax might be at 35, and he's 3 colors.
My advice to people
But-
would be put more lands in your
No.
deck.
So I used to run 36 lands on average, probably 38
Yeah.
and many, maybe sometimes. No, I don't think I ever went more. I think 38 was the top. And I slowly started kind of playing with that number and whittling it down. And I have found for me, now this also comes with smart mulliganing.
Right.
You know.
there's other aspects of this too that obviously are going to play into it. Ramp is something we keep mentioning. Ramp is going to change this again
Well,
because of the way it works.
I don't necessarily play the same mana rocks and every. I mean, I always have
Soul Ring, Arcane Signet,
and Arcane. Yeah, Soul Ring and Arcane Signet.
Right.
Are always, those are pretty much the only auto includes.
for the most part. Yeah.
But I always play probably at minimum 5 mana rocks, minimum. But I have not put more than 34 land cards in a deck for about a year now at least. And I have never, ever, ever regretted it. Now, again, in a 5-color deck and probably a 4-color deck, I may run 35 or 36.
Yeah, you play so many mono-colored decks and
Well, but-
two-color decks. So
but here's the other
I can maybe, if most of my decks were 1-color or 2-color, you also have a different play style than me. You tend to do more control, so
Yeah.
you don't need as much stuff. I tend to build giant board states or go after the big flashy stuff or do enchantments where I'm playing 3 or 4 things on a turn. Plus, I tend to have to play through your counters. So, like, it's just different.
Yeah.
Right.
And I do play more 4 and 5 colors than either of you. So
Yes,
it
that
does
is
make a difference.
Yeah, I actually have 0 5-color decks.
I
haven't-
have one technically, but it's Nagila, and I don't really.
Yeah, I just, and the main reason why for me is to go off on a small tangent, as I haven't found a 5-color commander that I'm like, I want to play this until Assassin's Creed. I think that's gonna be my first 5-color.
It's crazy as next month.
Yeah, I know,
Like
but
the pre-release was
It's so
Modern
stupid.
Horizon 3
It's so
was
honestly, it's so
yesterday.
dumb.
so the whole I think the whole big thing with this, and the reason why, because Duncan was asking me about this earlier in the week, like, hey, what's another counter spell subject? I was like, we should talk about lands because all 3 of us have different ideas. So Duncan's more heavy into basic lands. Jeff, generally speaking, is very light on basic lands, and I kind of fall right in between them. I'm usually between like 15 and 20 basic lands is where I end up falling. And the main reason why is because, like, for example, a lot of people are like, oh, you're playing multiple colors, you should do Terramorphic Expanse and an Evolving Wilds. I'm like,
Ugh.
or just put in a land that is multicolored.
Also,
Right.
you can play cycle lands. Like, if you're going to have lands, you're not going to get stuck with lands if the lands have cycle on them.
Sure, but you're-
Surveil.
yeah,
Those are great
so,
ones.
So there's different ways to look about it and go about it, but I think ultimately we all 3 have different ideas of why we should be where we're at. For me personally, the land count has a lot to do with the curve and the speed of the deck and what the goal of the deck is. If I don't need a lot of lands to get my deck to do what I want it to do and what it wants to do, I'm probably not going to invest too heavily in lands or multicolor lands. If I'm playing a 2-color deck like my Prosper Black Red, I have very few dual color lands in there because it's 2 colors. Like, I don't need a bunch of different multicolored things. If I have a deck that's 3 or 4 colors, however, I might run some of the triomes because I need something that gives me 3 colors that I can choose from. Or I like
your
to do
5-color deck, you're going to have to run Triumph.
right. And so there's definitely strategy going into it. Like we said, this isn't like a blanket statement. This is the way to do it. But in the way we all play and the way we build our decks is, as you can tell, just even from our land base, is very different. And we have different ideologies.
So I will tell you too, I do not have. I can't even think of. I do have a 4-color deck. My Hugs deck is 4 colors.
Yeah, the Greek gods.
Yeah. So I have 5-color decks, but I don't really treat it like 5 colors. I just need to have access to Wooburg so I can activate Nagila's ability.
Right.
And I'd have to look at what my breakdown of color cards in there is.
Yeah.
But anyway, if I were to build a 4 or 5-color deck now, there are enough of the 2-color lands that say enters tapped unless whatever.
You have 2 or more
more
basic
opponents.
or 2 or more
You have a
opponents.
swamp.
Yeah.
You have I would
Reveal
play
a swamp from your
most
hand.
of those as my 2-color.
The only ones I play are the ones that say if you have more than 2 lands.
Why wouldn't you not play the ones that say if you have more than two or more opponents?
Sorry, those two.
Yeah.
Because everybody
No,
plays those. In Commander, that's a staple.
To me,
But no, other
ones,
than that.
the ones that say, though, if you reveal a swamp from your hand.
I don't play those.
If
I
you
don't
reveal a
play those
swamp or an
because
island
that you
from your
have
hand.
to have it in your hand. If the ones that say as long as you have a swamp, I would play those because I would still play enough basics that it's going to be.
Yeah, but you have to be careful. See, it's easier for me to do it because I have triomes that have all three types
But
on
this
them.
is what I'm saying. I would personally not play those triomes.
You will not. You will have a very difficult functioning 5-color.
I mean,
deck.
I have a 4-color deck and it works fine. And that's kind of where I went
And
with that one.
yeah, I mean, and that's the point of this. Is so I mean, you can go heavy basics and minimal, utility
And I
slash
will also tell you,
multicolor.
especially with the new moon in Modern Horizons 3, more and more you are going to pay for your non-basics.
I still think most casual players are not playing those cards.
Well, I will tell you, I play it, and I've gotten a lot
and
of
your
those. just
group is more towards CEDH, more towards proxying very expensive cards, which is probably why your land count is low. Because you guys are using things like Mox Diamond and
Right, but the
all
only
these
one of those
things
that I proxy
most
that I
casual
don't-
commanders are not playing.
Right, the only one of those I do not own is Mox Diamond, and I have decks that I don't put that in. But I'm just saying, like I have.
I'm not
the
saying
real
you
card.
don't own cards. I'm saying you guys play with those very high end cards.
Right, yeah.
And I don't think most casual players are that high.
Yeah, we're definitely high end.
Yeah.
But I even see more. I think you're going to see it more because that card is not expensive.
I don't. That's not why you don't see it now. You
No,
don't
but-
see it now because.
Blood Moon is an
People
expensive
don't-
card. I think it's $20.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a cheap card to buy.
But they have other stacks pieces that aren't expensive, and you don't.
But they're
see 'em.
not as good. And I'm saying, I think because this one is cheap, and I
at least
think
for now it is.
it's
We'll
new.
see.
I think you're going to start seeing it more.
Yeah.
But the other thing I did want to point out, one little tidbit that I have found very helpful, since I don't do a lot of fetches and I try and do mostly basics, what I use in every deck that doesn't have green, the only tap land I play for the most part is Myriad Landscape, because for that it comes in tapped, and then on another turn you can pay 2 and tap it and go get 2 basics.
yeah, sacrifice it. Go
Yeah, so,
basics of the
yeah.
same type. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't play that really in any deck.
See, but that's because you play the fetches
I play fetches and
Yeah.
I play land ramp
and you play the triomes and stuff.
Play
Whereas I
triomes.
don't. I
Cycle
use this as
lands,
another way,
surveil lands.
and I also will tend to use Solemn Simulacrum because then I can go get whatever color I need.
Yeah.
So that becomes. I probably play that more than you, although you do play it.
Well, you tend to play colors without green in it too.
Yeah.
So you have to play.
It's
solemn.
funny. I do find myself like green. It's probably the most popular color, I would say, and I think for me it's my least favorite because I think I see it so much. I like it. I think it's a great color. I'm just saying. I just realized
Yeah.
that the other day. But that's kind of how we go about our land base.
Yeah.
I don't like the this is the format and how you build your deck. Like Jeff said, you start at 42, and I think every deck and every player it's unique, and I think you need to find your own style. It may be a good point to start from.
People can do whatever you want, but if you're gonna it just depends on how sweaty you want to get.
Well, and I will say this too. There's a lot of videos out there on deck building, and from what I've seen, because I have watched a lot of them just to kind of hear what other people's opinions are, most of them are very broad and generic, and they tell you up front, this is kind of a basis. This is by no means the right way to
Right.
build this deck. Most of them will say your mana producing base, quote unquote, should be between 45 and 50. Your win condition should be between this many. So there's a lot of videos out there to say that. And for the most part, almost all of them that I've seen, I've looked into, including articles and such like that, all say this is just a formula that generally speaking kind of works to get you started on how to build a
Right.
deck for the first time.
And the thing
and
that
I'll
affects you the most is your meta.
So
If you're playing with Duncan's group, you're gonna have to have a different design.
But here's the funny thing too, Lizard has gotten down to like 26 lands is his average now.
That's wild.
And what's crazy is we still see him get flooded.
Yeah.
We witness it. We see it. He will draw land after land. You hit pockets, it happens. But to him, I would think at 26 lands, we'd see it. We never see him get the other side of it. Or maybe once out of every 15 games, maybe that'll happen. So maybe it happens to him more often, right?
Yeah.
Because one
he
out of
may
15.
talk about it more too. He may run into 5 or 6 lands in a row, and because he's playing from the top of his deck, it's affecting him more. So for me, if I draw 5 or 6 lands in a row, that's probably not the only way I was drawing a card.
Well, I will also
I
say
just don't care.
his decks are lower to the ground. We've talked about before, like when we talked about CEDH and what makes a deck. His are pretty much all technically CEDH.
Which in casual, what it means is you run out of gas.
Right. Well, he doesn't tend to because he does have ways to.
If he's getting flooded out,
Well, it happens.
he is running out of gas.
Right, but with 26 lands, you wouldn't think that would happen as
Yeah,
often
that-
as it does. My point. He had.
It's almost a quarter of his deck.
You know, he only needs 3 or 4 lands. If he only had 3 or 4 lands the whole game, he can run a game.
Yeah.
That's fine. He's fine.
Right.
You know, maybe he'd like more, but I'm just saying it wouldn't
Most
hurt
of my
him.
decks would not function at
Right,
3 or 4
exactly.
lands.
Me either.
But the two that would be Rise.
And the other
Traxxas.
thing I would say about you play. I don't know how. It's like 2 things are true, and they seem like a paradox to me. You play higher mana cost stuff, but your decks tend to have a lower mana curve. So I don't know how that's.
Because the way he does it is all the stuff that's a lower mana curve is the stuff to get the mana to play the higher stuff.
Right.
Like that's
true.
how he does
He
it.
plays so much ramp
if you
and stuff. Yeah,
if you
I guess that's
design
how.
your decks properly with ramp and card draw, you will not have
Well,
a
and
problem.
that's the truth.
You will
Okay.
always have a chance for every game. Doesn't
So
mean you'll win.
If
but
he's
you'll be in
playing
it.
4 more lands than me, right?
Yeah.
Then that means he has 4 less card. Like those are all 0 mana cost. So
Right.
his curve automatically is going to be lower. So I
Right.
guess that's where it balances out.
Right.
You know, because he has so much ramp and so much lands.
And also, people say, what do they call it when you take lands out of your deck to make your chance of running into non-lands easier?
Filtering,
Filtering. No, they call it something else.
a thinning.
Thinning. Yeah, deck thinning. A lot of people said deck thinning doesn't work. It works a little bit. And the reality is I have so many spells that are going and getting lands. There's less in my deck.
Right.
I got 12 on the field. That's, 7 less than you do in your deck.
Right.
So my percentage of hitting a card that isn't a land is higher than yours. It's all percentages.
If you thin, but when you start off, yours are higher to hit it.
Yes, correct.
So,
But that's why the ramp is important.
Yeah. So you're getting more lands out. And
Correct.
But
Yeah.
So and at the end of the day, by turn 4, I have a smaller percentage of hitting a land than you do.
right.
And then there's some players like me where they're just gifted with just great luck, and I start with 1 land, and by turn 3, I have 3 lands.
Oh my gosh, he does this all the time. And last time we played, you did this and got stuck doing nothing for the whole game.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, you did.
The
At the
other thing,
Sarasota store.
the other thing tidbit for the players that don't play green, Wayfarer's Bauble. I found myself playing that more because
That's a good one.
yeah.
1 drop, pay 2, tap it, sack it, go get a basic, put it on the play tap, I think.
Yep.
Right, yeah.
And those also feed into why I play more basics because that's how I'm getting my
Right.
my color fixes.
So
But anyway,
whether you're going to go heavy basics, heavy utility / multicolored, or kind of even it out across the field, obviously look at what your deck's trying to do, look at what your deck needs, and then go from there. But that's just our 3 different kind of land-based
Yep.
ideologies, as it were, when it comes to building our decks.
for sure. But Aggro Jeff, what's aggravating you today?
Freaking Hasbro. Like this company built their entire business model on creating cartoons to sell toys, right? Genius, right?
Yeah.
They literally created cartoons and they did it just to sell toys. Well, you had Magic all this time. Can you not create a freaking content for this?
They tried.
Create a TV show? Fallout just did it, and that's a video game.
They tried. They had a contract with Netflix.
They need to
They
get
were
it
going
done.
to do it, and then they scrapped it for who knows what reason.
Who knows? But they didn't get it done.
You know, there was concept art. There was full done. Like I remember seeing like stills, and it's. I
You
wonder
can-
if it exists somewhere.
You
but-
can sell me
Maybe.
butterflies and fairies all day, but unless you're getting it done, it doesn't mean anything. It's not there. Where is it? If you create it, you will get young people into this game. You will get other people excited. Everybody's playing Fallout right now. Everybody's playing Fallout. Why? Because of the TV show.
Yeah.
One, because Fallout's awesome.
Well, it helps.
Our producer just gave us a thumbs up for saying that he's a big Fallout guy. Yeah, I mean, I will say that they definitely have the means and the capital to. And I will say this, if there's ever been a time to create shows for niche, I guess, hobbies or shows or games or whatever, now's the easiest time to do it because of all the streaming platforms. For example, so you got Fallout.
Yeah.
They're coming out with the Borderlands movie.
Yeah.
The League of Legends Arcana.
Right. That
on
was,
Netflix.
that had good fanfare.
And the second season just got announced this year.
You're a D&D guy.
D&D.
Which one is that? What's
Vox
that one called?
Machina? Or do you mean Honor?
Legends of Vox Machina.
Legends of Vox Machina.
Is
Well,
based-
and they did the show, too, the movie, too.
Yeah, and they did the
that was a
D&D
great
movie,
movie.
which was
Yeah.
a good movie. I mean, so if ever there was a time to be able to create this kind of content, and I think do it in a probably more affordable way than it's ever been affordable to do, because you have these streaming platforms who want exclusive rights. Like Netflix has the exclusive rights to League of Legends right now for Arcana. And where's Fallout on? It's HBO?
Amazon.
Amazon now has Fallout. Like that's their thing now. And now they're going to be tied pretty much to everything from here on out for that, right? It's
just a side note about Fallout. This is just, I was watching the other day, and so I used to have a friend who did marketing for the company that makes Fallout,
I don't know the name of
Bethesda.
Bethesda. Thank you, Jack.
Yeah.
Coming in hot again as a
Bethesda.
producer.
And he's like, they have the cool complex where out front they have a suit of power armor as a statue.
Yeah.
Like it's really cool. And he's like, and they're just cool guys, the guys that originally ran it and stuff. And so I think it was last year, Microsoft bought Bethesda.
Okay.
And one of the first things they did is license that out. And I'm like, if the guys who had started Bethesda has licensed it first, before they sold it, they probably never would have sold it because they'd be making so much money off that.
It's hard to
Right.
make those deals. They're not easy. That's why those guys
Yeah.
get paid what they get paid to do it. But it is interesting. It seems like Hasbro and Wizards or whatever it is going the other direction. Instead of making their own content, they're just going to take IPs that already have content. Lord of the Rings, all these different things. And I just think it's kind of you should have both and. It's
Right.
not one or the other. It should be both and.
Yeah.
But that's what's aggravating me. I don't know why they can't get it done.
I have a theory.
What?
I have a theory why they don't.
Why?
Because the lore is so bad. Have you read the
Well,
stories?
you know what a great,
so
you know what a
let's talk
great
about
way to
that.
reset it is? By creating brand new content that says, here's the new beginning of the lore. How many times has DC done that? 56 times, 57 times? They just reset the world.
Let's talk
we're
about
restarting.
that for a second. Fallout is not from the video game. It's just the world. And they put their own story in it.
No, it literally had the history from the video game.
It did, but this is a new story. This isn't a retelling of the story. It's just in the world.
Right.
And it references the history and the things we love, and there's Easter eggs. But they could do the same thing with Magic. They could tell, it has so many worlds, they could tell any story they want out of it.
Yeah, they could even say, this is from the world of Magic 1,000 years in the future, where all the stuff that is currently happening doesn't matter.
Or a
it
plane
doesn't.
that's being invaded by some other thing.
Or it's 1,000 years in the past before all the stuff that happened. There's ways to definitely get around it, I think, and there's ways to do it. And again, the easiest thing to do is we're just using the world of Magic as a skeleton. We're just going to create all of our own content. This is just the outside layer. Everything inside of it we're going to create, but you can have those familiar people show up. You can have Jace and
We're
Gideon.
just lowly podcasters, so we're not going to do all the work for Hasbro.
Listen,
Get it in
Unless they want to
gear
pay us,
and
then
get
we'll
the
do it.
job done.
Yeah, listen,
Get it in gear, get the job
our
done.
8 listeners, do a writing campaign for us. We appreciate it.
That's right. We'll mildly annoy Hasbro.
Or not even be noticed by.
Well, I think the
we'll
people who listen are good writers. The 8 of them.
But let's talk about things that don't do what you think they do.
Like
and
Hasbro.
This one was brought up by Sloan.
Yeah.
And I saw this happen in real time, which is what prompted him to say it. And I'm like, yep, that's a good one. And that is specifically the card Gemstone Caverns.
Right. So this is talking about lands. This is a legendary land. And it says, if Gemstone Caverns is in your opening hand and you're not the starting player, you may begin the game with Gemstone Caverns on the battlefield with a luck counter on it. If you do, exile a card from your hand. Add colorless mana. If Gemstone Caverns has a luck counter on it, instead add 1 mana of any color.
That's the tap ability.
Yeah, the tap ability. So you tap
So-
it, and that's what it does.
So he just read the card, which explains the card.
Right.
Yeah, this isn't even a complicated one.
No, but people do it wrong all the time.
It's because
See,
it's
we
a
were playing-
$45 card and you don't see it very often.
We were playing the other day, and Sloan saw somebody on turn 1. They were the first player. Say, okay, turn 0 play. I'm going to put this down. And Sloan said, no,
You
you're
can't
not.
do that. And they said,
And they,
well, why not?
what? Yeah, I had it in my opening hand.
I was like, you're the first player, though. It's the next line on the card. If you're not the first player, you may do this, basically. Right. So, yeah, it's one that, and I think, like Jeff said, because it's an expensive card and people don't think about it when they have it in their opening hand, just get excited. They're like, oh my gosh, I have a turn 0 turn. And it's like, nope, you're the first player. Can't do it. Sorry, man. Like,
so the solution to that is don't go first.
There you go.
Yep. If you win the die roll, you get to choose if you go first.
Yeah. Now I do want to say I believe your die roll is supposed to happen before you look at your cards in your hand. So you wouldn't know if this was in your hand if you won the die roll. But if it's something that's in your deck and you know it's a possibility,
just like land tax,
right? If you know it's something that's in your deck, maybe sometimes you just intentionally tell yourself, "Oh, this deck has these kind of cards in it. Maybe I don't want to go first. I'll go second or something."
So
like that.
I will point out too. I said technically you're supposed to. There is no rule about rolling dice.
Yeah.
Yet I think the rule is randomly determine who goes first.
Right.
But you're supposed to do that before anybody draws a hand.
Right. Yeah. Correct. So, but yeah, Gemstone Caverns is one of those ones because one, it's a really expensive card, so not a lot of people run it. Two, the people who do run it, when they do get in their open hand, sometimes they get a little
because
giddy.
it doesn't have.
It doesn't have that. Like, there's not a lot of turn zeros. The only other turn zeros I believe are the ley lines that I know of right off the top of my head, which are if it's in your opening hand, you can put this out for free, and then it has an ability, land of anticipation, punishment, and a couple other ones.
There's the void.
Ley line of the void, yeah. Which are all turn 0 cards also. So there's not a lot of turn 0 cards. So I just think a lot of people get excited when they have the opportunity.
This is the only one I think that has that caveat.
Yeah,
that you can't be the first player.
Yeah, if you're not the first player, you can do this. So so it's one of those things where it's happened a couple of times, and even again, veteran players slip up and they'll throw it out there, and I'm like, you can't technically do that. That's not how that card works.
Yeah, but the look on the person's face when Sloan burst their bubble, I thought they were gonna cry.
Yeah, I thought I was gonna get hit.
But so that's just one card, but definitely something I have seen more than just that one time.
Yeah.
Played
the
incorrectly.
best thing to say that doesn't do what you think it does. Yeah. If you don't read the card, it won't do what you think it does.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So this does what it's supposed to do and not what you think it does. So
but you didn't read the card.
Right.
Yeah. Reading the card explains the card, as the professor says.
Or as Johnny says, reading the card is OP.
Yeah. Reading's OP.
So now we're going to move on to our main topic. And this is one that I thought was kind of interesting. Have Commander players lost their way? And let me explain what I mean by that. There is a large argument, especially now with Modern Horizons 3, the argument came up that the game is getting too powerful. And so that got me thinking, has it? So I went and looked. Let's look at what originally EDH was.
Right.
EDH was originally Elder Dragon Highlander. That's what it stands for. And your commanders were the legendary dragons from Legends. They were high mana cost. This was back in the days before most of the powerful cards that we're used to today. And it was battle cruiser magic. It was you just pounded out, you're slow and plotting, putting down lands, casting spells, beating each other up. It was a long, drawn-out game, but it wasn't these big, huge, powerful swings that we're used to today.
Right.
It wasn't so much
And when he
combo.
says swing, he doesn't necessarily mean combat damage, because let's be honest, a lot of Magic now, combat doesn't even matter.
Right.
Everybody's just comboing off or locking you out. Or
Right. And I think really combos weren't really a thing back then. I mean, I'm sure there were some,
I didn't
but
play
it wasn't
then,
the
so
point.
I don't know, but I don't think
I
so.
can't speak to it because I didn't play it either back then.
We can suspect it wasn't.
So
though.
nowadays, it is very different. There's millions, I mean, not literally, there's thousands of commanders that you can play.
Yeah.
All doing all sorts of crazy stuff. There's partners, so you can have two different things they're working in synergy, or two different themes even that you could have in your deck.
Right.
There's, way more mana rocks. There's crazy triple damage and triple token
And
all
there's a
that-
ton of combos because now there's so many cards out there that how they interact together is who can know how they all work. Anytime you make a card, you could be breaking everything. You didn't even know it.
And so while I was looking this up, I was seeing comments on forums and stuff and realizing that there are two halves to the EDH or Commander society. There is the largely casual, not at all even coming near CEDH.
Yeah.
A lot of jank, I guess would be another term that could be used, sector. And then there's the higher power. And I'm definitely on the higher power. When I started, I was probably over that line onto the higher power, but not, as anywhere near as close as I am now.
Yeah.
But still kind of some jank and I really realized that there is, so we talk about the players that want to ban Soul Ring, right? Well, that's the players in the casual. They don't want what it's becoming. They don't want
Because
to
it
be
gives,
high.
if you have a soul ring, it just, the game changes so much.
Yeah.
And the percentage of everyone has it in the deck, but what's the percentage of actually hitting it? It's pretty low.
So I would have to say, based on my research, that I think we have strayed from what the game originally was. Now, I like what I play now. I don't want to play Elder Dragon Highlander with just the dragons and the plotting and I don't want to. I guess there might be some fun to playing that way once or twice, but that's not what I want to do.
Yeah, and to kind of give you an idea, I looked up one of the Elder Dragons. This is Vavictus Asmati. He's 2 colorless, 2 black, 2 red, 2 green. So 2, 4, 6, 8 mana. He has flying. He's a 7/7, and he has pay 1 black, gain +1/+0 to end of turn. Pay 1 red, gain +1/+0 to end of turn. Pay 1 green, gain +1/+0 to end of turn. And then pay 1 black, 1 red, 1 green during your upkeep, or you have to bury him.
Yeah.
So this 8-cost flying dragon that has 3 activated abilities based off of 3 different colors
That you
then have to keep
for.
paying for at the beginning of each of your upkeeps is one of the original commanders from the game.
Yeah.
I can't even think of another card they've printed recently that has so many abilities that do the exact same thing with 3 different mana costs, because on top of the fact that it has a giant negative every upkeep, you have to pay for it or it dies. Like, it's a really crazy card. But to your point, this is very different from where we're at now.
Yeah.
Clearly. I mean, close your eyes and point at any legendary creature that came out within the last 5 years, and it's much better than this card in regards to mana value, abilities, just anything. Regarding that, I will say this. There is some fun to a simplistic version of Commander, right? Where you're not sitting here spending 20 minutes contemplating how to cast your spells in sequence correctly to make sure you get the most benefit, to make sure that you're gaining all. There is advantages and there's plus sides to that, right? The simpler the game is, the more straightforward. I'm just going to cast this big creature. I'm going to swing and attack you. I'm going to cast another big creature. I'm going to pay to keep this creature alive, or maybe I'll just let it die. And I'm just going to. There is fun to that. And I think, to your point, doing that every once in a while, I think that's not a bad thing. And I think that is a good thing in regards to kind of remembering or going back to what it used to be. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, the game evolves. Everything evolves ultimately at the end of the day. There's very few things that, if you look over the last 30 years, hasn't changed.
It evolves or it dies. Really.
Right. I mean, there's so few things that I can think of off the top of my head that probably haven't changed in regards to the actual physical or very core of what they are, that haven't changed, that are still around. Where it's crazy. I mean, we were just talking about video games before. Atari used to be a freaking knob, and you played Pong, and that was it, right? We've now up to the point of where we have 4K televisions where there's professional video game players that get paid to play, right? So everything does evolve. And I think to the people who I want to ban Soul Ring, I want to ban all these things because this is ridiculous. This is not what EDH is.
So
Rule 0. Do that with your play group.
To speak to one of the things you said is all the triggers being so complicated. There's actually a movement out there among Magic players where they choose to have less of that. Like they pull cards out of their deck that cause there to be more triggers. So they're actually thinking about when they're building their deck, are these triggers going to get too out of control? Because they don't want to be frustrated with it. Like they don't want that complex of a game. There are also people that will choose not to have cards like Ristic Study because they're tired of asking people if they want to pay the 1. There are people that won't play as many cards that go and search your deck because they're tired of wasting time shuffling. There's a lot of stuff that happens that people have preferences on, but what Duncan's main thing was, are you more towards this high power? Or are you more towards this low power? Personally, I like, you guys have been listening to us a while. I like strategy. I like to build my decks well, but I just build them with some rules built in so that it doesn't get too far to power, but yet it's not going to be, I'm not playing birds inefficiently.
I mean, to that point, by default, you're more towards the power because you are using the newer cards. Even though you're limiting your selection, you are still using newer cards that do more powerful things that are powerful cards.
Yes, I am leaning more towards that, but I play with specific rules so that I stick to I try not to do mass land destruction and not do stacks, and I don't always play the most optimal cards. Like I spread them out my decks so that it's not in every deck, and just I try to have a few rules to keep it more casual.
Yeah, the ultimate question: are we better or worse than we were originally? I think that's going to depend on what camp you're falling in.
Yeah.
If you're falling in the I want big stompy, just basic, straightforward Magic, we're much worse. we're very much worse.
I think we're better because I think we're better for simple reasons. Like the art is better. They have more cool foiling. They have more cool types of cards. They have in my opinion, everything's just gotten better. You look at those old cards and I'm like, this art is terrible. This card looks stupid.
This art, if you haven't looked it up yet, Vivictus Asmati it looks like it was drawn with watercolors that smeared when it got sent in through the printer.
I think you're being a little harsh.
It's not great. It's definitely...
It's a different art style.
But it's because they didn't have the same level of capabilities that we have now. They don't have computers that can just generate pictures for them. Back in the 90s.
Supposedly they're not
Duncan, that's pretty bad.
Yeah,
that is not...
It's not pretty.
I don't know who's going to... maybe you like old school stuff and you like it because of nostalgia. That's the only way you like this. You're not going to ask anyone who knows anything about art.
There is an
artist and go,
artist out there that drew that, whose name is on the card that you guys are looking at.
Well, be better.
Well, I'll even say that there's a one set that they did where they got this new contemporary artist recently, last year or the year before, and they made this really weird Faithless Looting. I was like, what is this art? This is horrible. I just want to color over it with a black Sharpie because I can't stand the way it looks.
There's a new Visvic. So you tell me, did it get better? Yeah, that's the new version of it.
It's more realistic.
It obviously got better,
right? So,
but that's talking. We're not talking about that. Has nothing to do with EDH.
I'm saying for me it does. I'm saying for me the fact that the cards have better art does make a difference.
But that's not. How does that tell you if we've lost our way from what the game of EDH was originally supposed to be?
I don't know that we have lost our way because I like the way we're going.
But do you like it doesn't mean we've. So I would say we have 100% lost our way. And I think the problem is. There is 3 different fields in the game thinking they're playing the same game. CEDH thinks they're playing EDH. They run by the same rule set, same ban list.
Yeah.
EDH players, I'm calling EDH, are the ones that are more janky, drawn out games, don't want the Soul Ring, don't want this power creep. And then there's Commander, which to me is that middle ground, which is the not quite CEDH all the way down to janky, but still pretty powerful.
Yeah, I do think that, and this is kind of also where the scale of the power level scale kind of comes into play and kind of tilts your hand on where you're at. Some people go 10 to 1, other people go 1 to 10. I think we all do 1 to 10 here. So 10 being CDH, 9 to 10 being CDH.
I don't use that scale.
I understand
it's way too ambiguous.
I understand that. But my point being is that most of the people, generally speaking, that are going to be the ban the soul ring, ban the fast mana, ban all these things, don't use them, we don't like them, let's go back to just basic Magic, are generally going to be not CEDH players, like you're saying. Like they're on the opposite side of the scale.
Right.
So when you're looking at that scale, I would say Jeff is probably closer to, if we're looking at the scale of 10 being the CDH players, 1 being the let's go back to 1998 EDH, right? I would probably say the majority of us are landing between the 5 to 8 number, right? We're somewhere in there where we're more towards the power side. We're not saying where we came from is absolutely horrible, because obviously if that never happened, we wouldn't be here, right? But yes, we're not anywhere near where we used to be. Is it bad? I don't think so.
Well, it's bad for those players that want that.
Sure. For those players,
that's kind
and
of
those
where I wanted
people,
to get to a point in this conversation is I think they need to make 3 different versions of the game. Now they're compatible to play the decks against each other, but they're 3 different versions.
I think their argument is there's 1,000 different versions of the game.
yeah,
I think their argument is if you're playing with if I'm playing with someone and they're like, I don't like Soul Ring, I'm like, great, I'll make a deck that doesn't have Soul Ring. You tell me what cards you don't like. We'll make a few of those decks. Sometimes we'll play the decks you want, and sometimes we'll play the decks I want.
Well, what's
But
funny
you need
is
to make a deck that you can play with me too.
when
though.
I really looked at this group of players that's on that lower, like really low powered side, right? And I really looked at, I have decks that I do not put any of the really expensive, powerful cards in so that I can play in games with people, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, even those decks, I'm pretty sure are too powerful to play against those.
Because it's not the expensive cards they're trying to get rid of. What they're trying to do is get rid of fast mana.
Well,
because they want the games to be more even. What they don't want to happen is someone pops off because of these quite powerful cards.
and no one can catch up.
one can catch up. So it's really just watching that guy play solitaire. And so what they're saying is if we get rid of fast mana, it makes everything more even. And I get that. And I'm happy to play those decks with you. But I want to play the other ones sometimes too.
I just think they need to. We're all playing the same game, but with different rules almost.
Yes, we are.
But it's supposedly the same rules, and I think that runs into problems when you go out in the wild.
I don't
because
disagree with you.
They want to sit down to a game, and they have a different idea about what they're playing than you.
I agree.
Yeah. And again, part of that falls on kind of Wizard in regards to they don't have, like we said, there's no distinction between CEDH rules
Well, actually,
and EDH
it falls
rule.
on the Commander Council.
Right.
because
Correct.
they-
Well, Commander Council, yeah, specifically.
That
So-
is not Wizards. That
yes,
is
Commander
the
Council.
rules
So there
committee.
is no CEDH rule set and EDH rule set, right? So like you said, like someone can sit down at a casual game, buzz out a CEDH deck, even though you might really piss everybody off at the table, because there is no distinction.
Right. And I'm saying that
nothing
I think
matters.
they need to make the distinction. And while making that
I agree
distinction,
with you.
you can know that, yes, you can play games across that line
I want
because
there to-
they're basically the same structure.
I want there to be a CEDH ban list and an EDH ban list.
No,
I want there to be
I
separate.
think-
I don't want 3.
I think there needs to be 3.
I think it just
EDH
needs to be 2.
should be the lower powered jank. Commander should be the mid tier, and then CEDH is the higher.
You know what would help keep people from playing CEDH and EDH games if we brought back Ante.
That's true. That's true.
That would keep you from wanting
Dude,
to
that
build.
jank player would be like, "This is
Yeah,
awesome.
let's do this.
Yeah, yeah,
You have
sure.
a
I'm
chance
down.
to win a bird."
Yeah, and that would fiix it real quick, because you plop that CDH deck down, you flip over a Jeweled Lotus or a Mana Crypt, you're like, I gotta win
Or
this
a
game.
Mox Diamond.
Yeah.
Except for a lot of them play with proxies, so they're like, "Okay, you got my fake card."
So, but I mean, I do think. I mean,
I
it's
left
hard.
them speechless.
It's
This
hard.
is awesome.
It's hard to say it without saying something crazy. But essentially, it does come back to either the Commander Council needs to do something, or you just need to be vocal when you sit down and tell people what you're going to play.
But here's what I feel like happens. Now, I do think that the jank lower end players are the minority.
yes,
We gotta be
I
careful
think the
calling
mid-tier-
it jank. I don't know that that's.
well,
the
that's a
best.
type
keep
of.
picking
That's
on
a-
Can
their
we just
bird
call
deck.
it casual? They're very casual. Like very casual is what we could call it.
let's call them grandpa
What's wrong with
players.
the word jank? They use it.
That's true. And jank is a type of
I'm
deck
not
style.
using a racial slur here.
Because what we're saying is you might want to play birds without any fast mana, but it doesn't mean your deck doesn't still work really well. Like you'd be surprised how well those decks work.
Some
They're
of them,
built well.
Yeah, but then that tends to be closer to the mid-tier. I mean,
Yeah.
I read forums where players are like talking, and I'm like, I did not know this version of Commander was so strong. Like, I thought this was just people. All right, I'm going to sound like a first worlder here, but I thought that was people that just didn't have the money to buy good cards. You know, I didn't know they did this on purpose.
Yeah. I mean,
because they want to have a more even gameplay.
Yeah. I mean, so I think ultimately what it comes down to is when we're talking about this, have we lost our way? Are we better off now or are we worse off? Because of the fact that it is a minority group of people who are like, we want to go back to this. This is the way EDH is supposed to be played. At the same time, if we stuck to that mentality, we wouldn't have some of the cool things that we have now. Not even like card strengths or anything like that. Just new types of cards. We wouldn't have these new abilities that have come out. We wouldn't have these new sets that are Maj Podges of Transformers and Lord of the like. We wouldn't have
they don't
any
want
of that.
any of that.
Right. That's my point. If we were to stick to that, sure, maybe the EDH format would still be in its roots, but we also wouldn't have some of the great things that we've gotten from it, and we wouldn't be in the place where we are now. So I don't think, if you look at it even as through a non-biased lens, not in power level of the game or the strength of the cards, not even all that, just where has the game gotten to because of the fact that EDH has evolved into Commander and the format it is now. I think we are better because we have more available to us and better things that have come out of it, where we get to indulge into some things that we enjoy even more because Magic has evolved so much that where I can now play Gandalf the White. I can now play Frodo. I can now play Slicer. Like, we have all these cool, I can play Godzilla. Like, I don't think we would have any of that if we stuck to the original roots of where Magic was
So
at.
you guys don't understand what I just said either, but he was looking straight. We're sitting left and right of him. He's looking straight ahead.
Because I'm trying to think.
Who's the guy in Office who keeps looking at the camera? What's his name?
Jim
Halpert. Yeah. What were you gonna say, Duncan?
I was just gonna say, but that's why I think we need to have 3 separate formats.
I mean, ultimately, the Command Council come out and saying there's 3 different formats now is no different than someone sitting down and saying, hey, this is a super low powered deck. It doesn't really do anything. I don't run Soul Ring. I don't have Mana Crypt.
Well, by saying that, they'd be like, now we have 3 times the responsibility. Now we have to manage 3 different lists.
Right. And I think it does come back to, it's ultimately on the players. Like, if you're going to go into an LGS and you're going to sit down at a table and then you're going to get upset that everyone's playing Magic in a modern format of Commander and you're playing with cards that haven't been printed since 2000, like, that's not their fault. You have, unless you were coming back to Magic since 2000, you have no reason not to know that the game has evolved.
Like, they're the more pure players. They're the one closer to what the original intent
Have
was.
you ever
And go find those people and play
Have you
with
ever
them.
seen someone like sitting down questioning a politician, and they'll ask him a question, and the politician answers a different question?
Right.
Like, they just decide to answer the question they want. That's how I feel about this topic. It's like, have we lost our way? I don't care. It was never my way. I was never part of EDH, Dragon, Highlander stuff. That's not when I came into the game.
Yeah.
I came into the game when the game basically functioned the way it does now. And it's maybe just got a little bit more powerful. It's got cooler cards. They look better. I'm going to get an X-Men card coming out here soon. I'm stoked. Like, okay, it wasn't what it originally was. It's what it's always been for me.
No.
Yeah. So I would say we're better off. Have we fallen away from the original EDH? Yes. Are we better? Yes.
Yeah. Again, it's all opinion.
Yeah, it is opinion, and I just think it's not fair to everybody.
Yeah, and we get paid nothing to give our opinion for 8 people to listen
Which
to.
is why we give it.
Yep. Nobody asked, so we give it.
Yep.
That's right.
All right. How about pro tips for beginners?
Yeah. So talking about, EDH in its original kind of beginnings, it was pretty straightforward for the most part. You just put out big stompy creatures and you killed people. Well, nowadays it's a little more complicated than that. So when building your deck, win conditions. Make sure you have a clear and concise kind of way to win. It's a little bit rough when you're sitting down to a game and your win condition is not to let anyone else win. Like, no one really enjoys that.
I do.
I mean, Duncan's a bad person though, so we're not going to count him. But no, for example, when you're building your deck, kind of think of what your deck's goal is, what you want it to do, and how is your deck going to win by doing that. So we kind of talked about when we built Oliver's deck a couple episodes ago, Lazav, milling people's cards, and then you exile a creature and you make him a copy of that, so then you hit them. So one way you can win with that deck is commander damage. So you can maybe Voltron it up a little bit, put some things in there to boost them, make them unblockable, give them hexproof too, so he can't be targeted as easily. And then you kind of hit people with commander damage with creatures that maybe like you turn into a 10/10 dragon, and so that way he hits for 10 commander damage. So that's one way you can win. So if that's kind of your focus, then kind of make sure when you're building it, leaning into that a little bit. There's other ways too where, for example, another way you could win is comboing off. So making sure you understand how that combo works if you're going to put it in there. And
you probably should have more than one.
And that's the other thing too, is making sure you have more than one win condition. Or if your win condition is really heavily reliant on your commander, make sure you have ways to protect your commander then. So when you're building your deck and you're thinking about, okay, I have all these cards, I have this commander that I really like, I have this idea that I really like. One of the questions you should be asking yourself, besides what my land base should look like, is how do I actually win? And so you should always have, in my opinion, there should always be this is, if I get this off, I'm instantly going to win card. I always think it's kind of fun to have one of those, one, because it's cool if you get to pull it off. And two, a lot of times they're kind of cost-wise CMC expensive. So having them get to pull off, for example, Omniscience is like one of the most notorious ones. It's if that enchantment lands, you can cast cards from your hand for free without paying your mana cost, essentially. So a lot of times if someone's able to get that on the board and no one can do anything, it's pretty much game over, right?
Yeah.
So having like one of those instant wins, and then always having some backups too, and then making sure you have stuff to kind of protect those win conditions or help you get to those win conditions more consistently.
So I will say though, here's the other thing. Omniscience by itself isn't actually a win con.
Right. It itself doesn't quote unquote win.
I have had a deck before where I built it and I had Omniscience and it did a lot of stuff, and the whole point was nobody could have stuff, right? And so I'm doing my thing, and then I get down Omniscience and I'm like, well, now it's clear they're never going to have stuff, right? Because I can just keep doing this.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, but how do you win?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't have things. That's how I win. Well, that's we
win.
can sit here and not have things and also not win.
Yeah.
Yeah. So make sure that whenever you're building that condition, whenever you're focusing on this is how I'm going to win.
If you play Omniscience, for example, you should be able to say, so now I keep drawing cards, I keep doing things, I keep making it so you can't have things until I get to whatever the win con is.
Lab
Man. Or another classic combination with Omniscience is enter the infinite. Draw your entire library, put one card back on top of your library. Now you have every card, you have 90 something cards in your hands or 70 something cards in your hands that you can cast all for free. Can anybody stop me? No.
One of the things I want to say on this is not just having multiple win conditions. You need to have different types of win conditions. So let's say you're playing an artifact deck. You need to understand if someone plays a card and shuts down your artifacts, how else are you going to win? If you're playing a graveyard deck and someone shuts down the graveyard, how else are you going to win? When we talk about alternate win conditions, we're talking about ways your deck can win if you don't get to do the primary thing you're trying to do.
Right.
So Atraxa plays Planeswalkers. Well, if for some reason my Planeswalkers aren't working, what's plan B? Okay? And so it's probably good to have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. In my opinion, they do not have to be one card win conditions.
No, and it's very dangerous. But there needs
to be a plan.
If you have a one card win condition, that's your only win condition. Somebody exiles that as you cast it.
Yeah, but even if you have four of those, it's still not that good
right.
of an issue.
And when I say that instant win kind of spell, not necessarily just one card, maybe a combo,
like a Crater Hoof if you have a creature.
Yeah, like for example, if you're a creature heavy attack damage kind of win condition, if I cast this Crater Hoof at the right time, this will basically win me the game if no one can stop it, because I'm going to do all my creatures do 85 trample damage and I have 15 creatures out. Like there's no way someone can block all of it.
So I've told you 1,000,000 times not to exaggerate.
But I mean, in my defense, Jeff has had 400 elves out in his Rise the Redeemed deck and cast a Crater Hoof that gave him all plus 200 plus 200. So I'm not
Yeah,
exaggerating. It's happened before in our games.
That's good times.
Right. So, there should be a goal. You should have backup win conditions. You should have, and like I said, I do emphasize protecting win conditions too, because that's sometimes a little bit easier in regards to building it into the deck. Sometimes when you have too many win conditions, you then don't have enough ways to get to each of them. So then you kind of hurt yourself by spreading yourself out too thin. But so there's different ways to go about it. But make sure when you're building your deck, there is a way to get across the finish line, not just preventing other people from getting across it.
Right. Preventing others from winning is not winning.
Correct.
It's
Unless
just
you
being
get them
really
all to
annoying.
scoop.
If that's what it is.
That might be a
My
win.
win condition is you giving up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is a lot of people's win condition. That is not a win condition.
No, that's how to lose friends.
So I like that. That's
Choose
a good
better
one.
friends, people.
Yes. But that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Jack May at Info Pilgrims once again for editing, producing, just generally being a great guy. You can find us on commanderspod.com. You can email us at cast@commanderspod.com. And please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/commanderscon.com. And remember, everybody, please kill Andrew first.
If you can.